What I thought I'd talk about tonight is kind of three things. I thought I would go over the housing market with you and analyze it from a numbers perspective, talk a little bit about the investment property world and a little bit about the REIT world and what I see going on, and then what I do when I give these talks, even though everybody thinks they're coming to hear about real estate, and mostly they are. After I'm finished covering real estate, I go over what I call the values that I've been able to learn since I've been in this world for the last 63 years. So anyway, to get started, if you'll look at the information that we passed out on page number 1, it gives you analysis of how many condominium there are for sale in Dade County and what the absorption is. And I'm going to review that for a moment, and I'm sorry to bore you with numbers, but I thought talking to CFAs that they would kind of like numbers, and I chose to do this. And if you look at the numbers down on the bottom sheet of this page, it shows that we have a current inventory of 24,827 units in Dade County. And using August absorption numbers, which are 426, and annualizing that, that's 5,112 units a year absorption. And simple arithmetic would tell you that that means there's about 4.85 years to sell the current inventory. That's a serious problem. And the housing market is very similar to that down below. There's 14,909 units. We're absorbing about 4,620 units, which gives you about 3.2 years worth of inventory remaining. But if you look further down the bottom of that chart, it shows you in the last month values went down 1.7%. Last 3 months are down 4.8%. The last 6 months down 6.81%. Anyone would say that's a disaster, and it is. But you got to realize that they're up 42% in the last 3 years. And so if you look at the chart on the next page, you can see the reason that our fall is going to be bigger than most persons' falls. That Florida home prices are sky high. And if you look at it from 93 to 2003, they went up much higher than the average throughout the United States. So what's going to happen? Anything that goes higher is going to end up going lower, in my judgment. And California is a good barometer to analyze where we're going. Florida normally follows California. California, my understanding is there's some areas that have had as much as a 25% depreciation in value. We're down 6.4% according to this, 6.8% according to this latest data by Mike Cannon. And I thought there was a very good article that he and the other person did in the Miami Herald that summarized two different views of it. That being said, are we going to have the disaster that we had a few years back in the late 80s, and then in the 70s and the 90s and early 90s we had somewhat of a disaster? It wasn't anything like this, but back then the disaster was that the developers and the banks were holding the inventory, and therefore when it came time to sell the inventory, they were wholesaling them out and doing whatever they can do, and it wasn't in the hands of the retailer like it is today. So back then the banks and the developers got killed. The banks and the developers got wise over the years and basically said, look, I'm not lending any money for you to build that 40-story condominium that you're dreaming of unless you can come up with 120% of sales to cover my debt. In other words, if you owe $100 million, you've got to have $120 million worth of sales with 20% deposits. So what you have to keep in mind in this particular market today, all these units that you see, when they go vertical, they're pre-sold. Most of them are pre-sold. So that means it's going to be in the hands of the retailer. And these persons have a 20% deposit up. In a lot of cases, they have a no-cut contract, which means that you have to go bankrupt to get out of them. Some are not that way. And it's going to be a bloodbath for those that were buying and flipping condominiums. The feeling has been that there's been about 30 to 40% of the persons were buying these condominiums for investment. I really think it's north of 50%. So my vision of what's going to happen, it isn't going to be, the banks were wiser this time, so the banks aren't going to get killed. The developers were wiser, so I don't think they're going to get killed. There's going to be some blood on the streets in both of those areas, but it isn't going to be significant enough to hurt the banking industry or hurt the development industry. And keep in mind, for the last 9 years, these developers and banks have done extremely well, and they've never even hit their reserve for loan losses, almost none of them. I don't think it's going to be a bloodbath for the banks or the developers. But if it's in the hands of the retailers, if you just kind of look around your table and say that each one of us bought one of these $500,000 condominiums, and we say to ourselves, now what the hell are we going to do with this thing? It's going down in value. It's not going to go up in value. I didn't make the money I thought I was going to make. One of you might say, well, geez, I'm going to put Aunt Sally in there and just suck it up. Another one might say, I'm going to put, I'm going to rent it and I'm going to suck it up. Uncle Sam's paying for part of this. Or somebody else might say, the heck with it, I'm going to blow it out and lose my $100,000 and go on to the next event. All that doesn't really matter. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't mean it doesn't matter to the guy that lost $100,000. It matters a lot. But from a market perspective, unless there's a developer losing $50 million or a bank losing $100 million, it doesn't have a lot of impact. But what's going to have the impact, in my judgment, is the next 6 to 8 months in Dade County, because the next 6 to 8 months, there's about 9,000 new units coming on the market. And the feeling with my buddies who have these units is that there could be as much as a 50% default rate, even with the provisions that I told you about. And so what's going to happen with that inventory is really going to tell us what's going to happen to this market. If the developer gets stuck with 50% of those 9,000 units and there's 4,500 units put on the market for sale immediately and get me out of this at any price, I couldn't care less, the bank's blowing in my ear, I got to get out of here, I think those values could go down easy 25 to 35%, depending on the location. And I think it's very critical to realize these supply and demand numbers, you have to look at each locale to really make them make sense. For example, on South Beach, you don't have any real supply, and the demand is still there, so it's not that bad. On the whole beach area, it's kind of okay. From Omni to 36th Street, it's a bloodbath. There's no demand there. It's all speculators, and that could have a 40 to 50% decline. Key Biscayne it's pretty stable. There's not that much product on the market. So you got to look. Aventura's relatively stable. There's not that much product on the market. So you have to look at each locale. You can't look at a global market like I did. I mean, you can look at the global market to understand the global picture, but to understand what's going to happen in the neighborhood where you live, just understand the inventory around you and what the absorption is of that inventory. So there's some markets I think are going to hold up better than others. Coral Gables will hold up okay. I think downtown Miami is going to be hurt. Brickell's going to get hurt a little bit. Omni area is going to get hurt very badly. Beaches are going to get hurt a little bit. Key Biscayne is going to be okay. Aventura is going to get hurt. I mean, when I say it's 5 to 10% is going to happen everywhere, but 40 to 50% is only going to happen, I think, in the Omni area and that kind of thing. So what are you going to watch for? What's the solution? Just like anything else in life, you got to look for a savior somewhere. You got to figure out a savior. There's rumors that these developers are trying to get funds together that go something like this. That they're going to get stuck with 2,000 units worth $2 billion, and they're going to go to the government of Dubai and say, look, I'll give you a 20% discount. I'll put some money into the pot. You put all the money into the pot and put the carry into the pot, and we'll gut this thing out for 5 years and see what happens. I think if that happens, this inventory problem isn't going to be nearly as severe. I think if these developers get that inventory back and have to dump it on the market, I think it's going to be real severe. The newspapers are going to continue to blow this up as big as you can imagine, because foreclosures and that kind of stuff, that sells newspapers and gets everybody all excited. And there are going to be a lot of foreclosures. And as the housing market goes, Florida is the epicenter of the crisis in housing, Florida and California. We've had the highest escalations. We're going to have the biggest fall, same as California. So I think the areas that were growing so rapidly are going to be the areas that are going to get so hurt. What's happened in the credit markets, it's sieged up. It's just there's money, but there's nobody lending. It's just this whole subprime concept and this ABS lending and all this stuff that's happened has basically gone into a siege, so you can't get capital unless you have a balance sheet or a tenant. That has some strengths for future because you're not going to see any major inventory coming up, but for current, it's really a problem because those that are being foreclosed on and can't get another loan really don't care about 6 months from now or 2 years from now. They've got their crisis today, and they've got to resolve it. For 9 years, everybody wanted to own a home because they thought it was going up in value, second home, third home, fourth home. For 9 years, they wanted to own it. For the last 13 months, that's the worst disaster they've ever had. Nobody wants to own a home. Everybody thinks they're losing their shirt on a home. There will be a day when you want to own homes again. And if you look at this stuff in generations, in my judgment, if I had a kid today, I'd say go out there and rent whatever you can rent and get an option to buy. But somehow renting today is way better than owning. You can rent these $1 million apartments and homes for a couple $1,000s a month. I mean, your cost of renting is probably 25% of cost of owning. And that's what I would do if I were in the market today. I'd rent temporarily and try and get an option to buy.